Hello all, and welcome to the first of two topic lectures for July 9th, 2020. In this lecture, we will look at the class categories that the inhabitants of Rome were divided into. First, a brief overview of what I mean when I talk about class. In the Roman world, class was rigidly determined by three factors: citizenship, birth, and relative wealth. Different levels of class status corresponded with different rights. For example, freeborn Romans and freed persons, formerly enslaved people, had status, while enslaved individuals had no status at all. First, let's look at how the Romans divided themselves by citizenship status. When it came to citizenship, only free adult male inhabitants of Rome were considered citizens. This means that women, children, and slaves were not citizens and did not have the rights of a citizen. And being a Roman citizen carried many important rights, as Harvey selection number 6 tells us. Only citizens could vote, run for office if aristocratic, plead their case in court, and did not have to pay certain taxes. In addition, because they were citizens of Rome, they were exempt from the jurisdiction of governors in the provinces. And as Harvey selection number 8 shows us, citizens were protected from torture, and if they had to be executed, less severe forms were used. The higher class citizens could not be punished with working in the mines, crucifixion, or being burned alive. They are immediately freed from punishment if sentenced to one of these things. Because of this, the phrase Civis Romanum Sum, I am a Roman citizen, became a very important phrase. It distinguished the Romans from all others. And for these rights, a Roman citizen only had two duties: to vote and to serve in the army. And since army service was no longer mandated once the army was professionalized, really all a citizen had to do was vote. As Rome's sphere of control grew, she began to grant citizenship outside of those who resided in Rome. Harvey tracks this development well. Harvey selection number 1 talks about citizenship status in the regal period. This was the first time that citizenship was granted, not inherited by birth. After this, it became precedent to grant citizenship to citizens in Italy as long as they had been loyal to Rome for years. Loyalty was measured by how many soldiers they contributed to the Roman army. In the Republican period, to whom citizenship was granted was decided by the Senate, as Harvey selection number 2 tells us. This excerpt from Livy's History of Rome recalls 188 BCE, when full citizenship was granted to all who lived in Latium, the region of Italy where Rome is located. This grant also gave citizenship rights to children born of non-citizen men and citizen women, that is, women whose fathers were citizens. In 90 BCE, citizenship was granted to all of Rome's allies on the Italian peninsula. This marked a huge increase in citizenry. In Harvey's selection number 3, Augustus recounts the 3 censuses that were conducted during his reign. In 28 BCE, there were 4,063,000 citizens. In 8 CE, there were 4,233,000 citizens. And in 14 CE, the year of his death, there were 4,937,000 citizens. These numbers reflect citizens only and do not account for the women, children, or slaves that also inhabited the Roman Empire. In fact, citizens were a minority in Rome. And as Harvey selection number 4 shows, through the epitaph of a freed person of the imperial house, freed persons had slightly different citizenship status. They could not vote or hold office, but their offspring could. In the empire, citizenship was granted to even more people. Claudius, in Harvey selection number 5, gave a speech in which he gave citizenship to people who had been acting as citizens but did not legally have the rights of a citizen. This was done as a special favor for their service to the emperor. Much later, in 212 CE, the Emperor Caracalla finally granted citizenship to everyone in the empire, which greatly decreased the value of being a citizen, as it nullified the status citizenship granted to individuals. Dio Cassius, the author of the first selection in Harvey number 7, suggests that Caracalla did this not out of kindness, but to be able to tax them under his new taxes he had just established that only applied to citizens. The Romans also had class divisions based on birth, which we will now turn to. There were only 2 categories of birth in Rome, patrician or plebeian. As we see in Harvey selection number 10, in which Livy recounts the founding of the Senate and the families that chosen to populate it, the patricians were wealthy landowning families. In theory, all members of the patrician class were descendants of this first Senate, whom Romulus called the patres, hence where we get the name patrician. Patricians were the only citizens who could hold office and could only marry other patricians. This status could not be granted, won, or purchased. The only way to be a patrician was to be born a patrician. The vast majority of Romans, however, were plebeians. that is, anyone who was not descended from those original 100 families. This division between peoples led to a huge conflict in the year 494 BCE, when the plebeians, tired of their interests not being considered by the wealthy patrician government, withdrew from Rome and left the patricians to fend for themselves. Since they produced most of the food and labor for the city, the patricians were eventually forced to give the plebeians what they wanted so that they would come back and resume doing all of the jobs that were below patrician birth. This conflict of the orders, as it is called, led to the creation of the magistracy of the tribune, as well as the concilium plebis, the voting committee solely for plebs. You'll learn more about these in the second topic lecture. Finally, the conflict of the orders also resulted in the right to intermarriage between plebs and patricians. The final division within the peoples was that of wealth. There were 3 wealth divisions within Rome: senatorial rank, equestrian rank, and the poor. In order to be considered a senator, you had to have a wealth of over 1 million sesterces, as per the census. Only people who reached this level of wealth could be in the Senate, but if the censor decided you had failed morally, your status as senatorial could be revoked even if your wealth remained the same. Harvey's selection number 11 shows the efforts and money that senators expended to keep up the image of being morally upright while also gaining popular support. Pliny was morally upright because he spent his money on the less well-off, his freedmen, and a banquet for the urban poor, as well as projects for the betterment of the people, such as the libraries and baths that he funded, all of which would have also made him look good in the eyes of the common people. To be considered an equestrian, a citizen had to have a wealth of more than 400,000 sesterces. To mark their status, equestrians were allowed to wear a special gold ring and a toga with a narrow purple stripe. The senatorial class wore a toga with no stripes. Most equestrians gained their wealth through trade, something which senators were banned from doing, as we'll see on the next slide. In the empire, many special posts in the government were given to equestrians. Harvey's selections number 12 and number 13 show some of the special privileges given to equestrians. The equestrian order itself was formalized by the Lex Claudia in 212 BCE, which banned senatorial class people from earning money through foreign trade. Thus, most equestrians gained their wealth through trade, and many who reached the 1 millionth sesterce wealth threshold chose to stay in the equestrian order in order to keep earning money. In these statue-based inscriptions, we can see the different roles that equestrians played throughout Roman history, from contractors and army officers to financial administrators under the empire. Even more special status was granted to the equestrians much later, as Harvey's selection 9 numbers show. In 394 CE, as this document shows, equestrians were exempted from torture and criminal persecution and were immune from taxes placed on the senatorial order. However, the vast majority of Romans would fall under the category of the poor. They did not earn their livings by trade or by being born wealthy, but by working. This means that there was virtually no middle class. There were the wealthy equestrians and senators, and the poor, and that was it. To get a good idea of the wealth disparity between these groups, let's look at the daily wages of a normal non-elite Roman. He or she, as women of the lower classes had a bit more freedom to work than in the upper classes, as we'll see later in the semester, would only earn 1 to 4 sesterces a day, which adds up to an annual income of 600 to 1,000 sesterces a year. Compare this to the vast wealth needed to become an equestrian or a senator. The majority of the literature we have, as we talked about on Tuesday, is from these upper classes of the equestrians and the senatorials. Let's look at 2 literary depictions of the poor, one from someone who would probably be considered poor, the playwright Plautus, and one from a wealthy man, the author Apuleius. Plautus was a stagehand and carpenter whose nautical business failed. In Harvey number 15, his poor fishermen compare their lives to those of the rich. The rich can buy what they want, while the poor have to make do with what they have. For the poor, their work clothes are the same as their daily clothes, and instead of exercising in a fancy gymnasium, they have to trudge to and from the city each day to sell their wares. In Harvey's selection 14, Apuleius, a provincial man who had enough wealth to at least be formally educated, writes about the life of a poor farmer from the perspective of an aristocrat who has been turned into a donkey and sold to a farmer. The life of the farmer is depicted as very similar to that of his beast of burden. They both travel back and forth from the city to the rural farm. Both donkey and farmer shiver at night in the winter due to lack of proper clothing and shelter, and they both eat rotten, measly food. Thanks to grave inscriptions, we do have some glimpse into the lives of the poor as they lived them. As I mentioned before, women of the lower classes had more freedom to earn a living than the upper classes, which the inscription in Harvey number 17 gives testament to. Because no man is named in her epitaph, she might have been a single woman supporting herself or her family after her husband died. Harvey selection number 18 shows how much military service could benefit a poor Roman. And finally, in Harvey selection 19, we see some epigraphs of non-citizen inhabitants of Roman cities. We know that they are non-citizens because Roman men all had 3 names, and most individuals found here only have 1. What these graves show is that, in order to save money, a tombstone would be purchased and engraved with all family members' names at the death of the first. There was one system in place that was intended to bridge the gap between the different classes in Rome, that is, the patron-client relationship. Patronage is not delineated by formal rules or laws like citizenship, wealth, or birth factions, but it is intricately tied to them. It was created as a way to link lower-class citizens with the upper-class citizens. Powerful men would serve as patrons to their social and economic inferiors, who were called their clients. Within this relationship, the patron provided financial and legal help, as well as protection to his clients. In return, the clients would perform actions that enhance the prestige or reputation of the patron, like voting for him, or attending his speeches and clapping loudly, or just walking around the city with him, as the Romans thought it was very prestigious to be surrounded by a lot of people. The relationship between patron and client was called amicitia, or friendship, and both patron and client referred to each other as friend, amicus, to show that the relationship was one of equals. In one sense, this brought the classes together, but for the most part, it more sharply delineated the wealthy from those who depended on them. This is especially seen when it comes to freed persons. Formerly enslaved individuals automatically became the clients of their former masters, something we will talk about later in the semester. The most important aspect of amicitia was the salutatio, in which clients gathered each morning at the house of the patron to receive greetings and sometimes food and money. In Harvey selection number 206, Cicero defends a man accused of bribery by saying that seeking votes by giving people money wasn't bribery, it was just patronage. He argues that clients have no other way to thank their patrons than to do favors for them. In Harvey selections 207 and 208, we see how unequal the patron-client relationship could be. Clients would do their duty, show up every morning, only to be turned away by a lazy patron or forgotten. Both of these authors also suggest that patrons actively avoided the salutatio each morning, while at the same time still expecting favors from their clients. Selection number 208 also suggests that sometimes what a patron gives isn't even worth the trek to his house to get it. It was not uncommon for a lower-class person to have more than one patron, so he often faced the same rejection or lack of respect multiple times each morning. In Harvey selection number 209, we see how much amicitia had degraded in the late imperial period. Patrons still sought clients for prestige, but treated them differently based on their relative wealth. Juvenal shows that richer clients, who would need less help and could do more for their patrons, are given precedence over the poorer ones. And, like Martial in number 208, he also complains that most of the time appearing for the salutatio isn't worth it. Now we have a clip, yet again from HBO's Rome, that shows what a proper salutatio would look like.
Patron, I kiss you.
Benio, you honor me. What do you want?
I'll go straight at it then. My piss pots were all broken this past 9 days.
Oh.
Soldiers, naming no legions, thought it funny to tip them out over the heads of honest citizens.
Now. Who's to say it was soldiers? Might have been gladiators. Simulating.
I know soldiers when I see them. Not as I'm prejudiced. Most soldiers are good men, like yourself. But there's a lot of a foreign element these days.
It won't happen again.
Well, I should hope not. Roman citizens that need and deserve respect and get drenched in piss instead. Not a drop left. I mean, how am I to make cloth without piss? How am I supposed to make cloth with...
happen again.
Thank you, patron. Minerva keep you.
Brother Mascius.
Brother Varenus. Big man now, eh?
You're not so small.
Oh, these Roman bitches have done nothing but fuck and eat and fuck since I got here.
We're not on a good skin now, brother.
No disrespect to your women, huh?
I'm pleased to speak with you more, Mascius, but I must see to my clients first. And they are upset if they are not received in their proper order.
Of course. Excuse my crude soldier's ways.
Varenus, the patron in this clip, insists on greeting his clients in the order that they came to him, and does not allow his friend and former army mate to jump the line. Yet his frustration at his client's rage over broken piss pots shows the unequal relationship. His dismissal, "it won't happen again," shows just how trivial he sees his client's complaints to be. One definite error in this depiction is the fact that his client always refers to him as patron, and not amicus, friend. Finally, I want to talk about two other unofficial ways in which the Romans divided themselves. The first division is only amongst the senatorial class. In the era of civil wars, the senatorial class divided itself between the optimates, the best, and the populares, or populists. The optimates were traditionalists and sought support from the senatorial elite, while the populares, as their name suggests, sought support from the people. The final unofficial division is between the novi homines, singular novus homo, and the nobiles. This is yet again a division that only applies to the senatorial class. The new men, novi homines, were those men who were the first in their families to become consul, while the nobles were those who were known already. Nobiles, at its root, means known or recognizable.